Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you wherever you're joining us from. My name is George Kafka, and I'm one of the curators of Housing in the People, this second open house worldwide festival, which is just getting underway. For the next hour, we're going to explore some modern marvels. These are mid-20th century housing projects in quite different contexts from each other, and which operate at quite different scales, but both of which propose something quite radical for their residents when they were built. So first we have the Diablice estate in northern Prague. This is a mega housing estate of prefabricated blocks designed and built over 20 years from the 1960s to the 1980s to house nearly 30,000 residents. As well as housing, the estate featured public artworks, communal facilities such as schools, kindergartens, playgrounds, club rooms, and even an open swimming area. That's going to be presented by the team from Open House Prague, who are with architect Ondřejem Tučkem. After that, we head to Colombo and the Senanayaka flats, which were designed by the visionary architect Minnette de Silva in 1957. De Silva was one of the most famous women architects in the world during her time, and the Senanayaka flats exemplify her particular blend of high modernism and contextually sensitive design details. And we're very pleased to have a tour from curator Shayari de Silva, who also met up with one of the residents of the block. After these two tours, we'll come together again for a short Q&A session. So please send your questions and comments in the chat on YouTube. We'll be looking out for them, and our speakers will be ready to hear from you. So that's all from me for now. Let's head to a very cold rooftop in Prague. Over to you.
So, welcome to Prague. My name is Michaela Pankova, and I'm part of the Open House Prague team that is hosting the annual festival in May. It's coming, guys. You have to come too. We are now entering to the third hour of the tours, live stream mainly, exploring extraordinary housing around the globe. And I'm so thrilled I can start with our presentation that we have together with the city of Colombo in Sri Lanka. I think that both visions, what do they have in common? Both projects is that they were very modern, and as George said, really very innovative at the time of the creation. So now, as you can see, we are standing on the top of the high building. It's actually a panel building that belongs to the housing estate called Diablice. It is situated in the northern of Prague, and it originally housed around 25,000-30,000 residents. The estate is actually considered to be one of the most beautiful and also most well done housing estates in the Czech Republic. Many top-class architects were involved in its creation, and the name of the main architect who overseen the project between 1967 and 1982 was Viktor Tuček. The live stream we have will be guided here by the architect Ondřejem Tučkem, who happens to be the son or grandson of the original architect. And I will try to moderate the tour. We have to switch the AirPods for a moment, so be patient with us. And we will talk about the not only history and the quality of the projects, but also the current living conditions and its future development. So, Ondřej, let's try. Praha.
Thank you for the work. I hope you can hear me. So what we can see here from the roof formerly was the agricultural land, the field on the northern boundary of the capital of Czechoslovakia. Its development was intended in the mid-war period, but finally it happened in the 60s and 70s. The design and the urban plan of the housing estate was based on the architecture and urban competition in the 1963, and was very quickly built according to overall master plan from the competition, and it's based on the idea of the town in the park, houses in the park. So we can see the solitaire, freestanding residential buildings surrounded by the mass of greenery and the public areas, which is the big value of this part of town.
I hope you are hearing me too. I just wanted to ask quickly, Ondřej, about what makes this Jablitze project so unique, or rather what distinguishes from the other Czech housing estates.
So, in the beginning, the Jablitze housing estate was intended as a model example how these kind of bigger or large urban plans should be done, and it was the second generation of the Czechoslovakian housing prefabricated housing estates, and the architects and urban planners they took into consideration not only the quantity of the flats and of the people living here, but also the quality of not only the building itself, but the quality of the overall spaces here, public spaces, parks, and also the housing estate was equipped with public buildings, with public services. We can see the school right here in front of us, but it was not only schools, but as well the shopping centers and health care buildings and so on. The high value of the Jablitze housing estate is the traffic, because all cars circulate on the outer perimeter and do not cross the interior of the housing estate, so the middle stay untouched with the traffic, and it's created as a big city park and public space. Also, the buildings are quite unique and make some landmark, as we can see just in front of us. These residential buildings has a higher ground floor with no flats. There are some public services and also big openings, so pedestrians can cross the buildings. And the roofs of the buildings in which we are standing now, they have cantilevered slabs, which make some architecture ending on the roof, and the buildings are also decorated with small red squares, and a lot of them are also equipped with the art pieces, because art was the very important part of the whole architecture.
Perfect, I'm back. Because I myself am a resident of nearest city quarter, and I went here to my kindergarten and school, so I know there are a lot of artistic pieces here in Jablitze. Can you confirm that, Ondřej, or what do you think about the quality of the artistic production here?
So as I mentioned, the art was the important part of the whole concept from the beginning, and each building has its own artistic pieces, mainly located in the entrance areas in the ground floor. Each building has its own author, so here we have a collection of lots of pieces from different kinds, from different materials in the interiors of the residential buildings, but as well art was used in the interiors of the public buildings, also on the facades of the public buildings. Ceramic tiles were designed very carefully by artists, and lots of freestanding pieces of art are placed in the public space, in the parks, in the squares. The quality of the art varies. There are beautiful pieces which are very popular and famous here, and some of them not, and some of them were destroyed during the years. So people didn't take the quality. So there's important the political situation, because the housing estate was created during the socialistic era after the Velvet Revolution. It somehow was connected with the previous political system. So people didn't want maybe to retain the art pieces because it was connected with the political situation before. But now we are 30 years later, so I think that we are very glad that we have this art here.
So we are now approaching the final part of our presentation. I would like to ask Ondřej, because he himself is living in Jablonec for a long time, and what is the quality of living of the inhabitants here, and what do you consider to be the future of the estate?
I think that Jablonec is very cozy and a fine place to live. It took 30 or 40 years for the trees to grow, but now the initial idea of the city in the park is fulfilled, and I think this is the one of the most important things that people mention as the quality that they recognize here is the quality of the public space and the quality of the greenery here. But also, I think that the living in these huge buildings is quite fine, and the public services work very fine as well, schools and so on. Some of the public buildings, and one of them we are looking on now, they are empty and they are not work very well, and there is big discussions here between the inhabitants what to do with these relicts and how to add modern or up-to-date layer of new structures, of new buildings in this finished housing estate. And the discussions are not finished yet, but I think that as any other part of the town, central parts of town, these new housing estates need some refreshment as well. The buildings are modernized and insulated. They change their colors. The public spaces need some modernization as well. And some of the buildings we might find them not useful in the future. And I think that we can think about destroying them and add a new architecture, new quality architecture in these structures of the housing estate of Jablonec.
So I hope you hear me too, because this is the end of our presentation. And I would like to thank Ondřej very much for this quick brief introduction of Diablice, and we will have more time in the Q&As after the second video, pre-recorded video that will be from Sri Lanka. So guys, keep updated and put the questions into the chat in the YouTube, and we will gladly answer them. And we will see you downstairs. We are heading to this building downstairs where there is a very nice cafeteria. It's an independent, actually, organization who is doing it as part of the cultural community center. So we will also show you a little bit from the interior there as well, which is very nicely reconstructed. So it's not as empty as Ondřej said before. So see you guys there downstairs, and greetings from Prague.
Thank you so much, Ondřej and Michaela. Go and get warm in time for us to have the Q&A. And as Michaela said, we're looking out for your comments in the chat. Please pass on your questions to Ondřej and Michaela, any questions you might have on the estate, on its past, on its present, or on its future. But before then, we are now going to head to warmer climes. We're going to head to Colombo for a tour of the Senanayake flats with a special video presented by curator Shayari de Silva, who will also be joining us for a chat afterwards. So let's go over to Colombo now.
This incredible building that we're at, which is the Srí Lanka flats designed by Minnette de Silva between 1954 and 1957. So it's 10 apartments made in 2 blocks, and you can see that they're really structured around these very open stairwells, which Minnette speaks about the importance of really bringing light and ventilation as a way of making multi-unit houses in Colombo. And we are going to look at one of those apartments with Srí. Srí, do you want to tell us how long you've been here and maybe how you found the flat?
It's been a long time coming. I actually went to school across the street from here, and I always admired it. I've had a love of modernism and architecture for a long time. And about 4 years ago, I had an opportunity to rent an apartment here, which I've subsequently now owned, and I think I've restored it in a manner that is befitting Minnette's legacy to architecture in Sri Lanka. So please join me, and I'll follow you first. So, welcome home. So the first thing that you're going to notice about this apartment is its unusually high ceilings. I think high by any standards for any apartment in Sri Lanka. But you'll notice that there's a variation between the 2 plaster types. These beams were actually a feature of the building, but they were hidden by the architect because it was above a concealed ceiling, which Minnette would presumably have done to hide the asbestos roof. But when I found it was in such a state of disrepair that I saw these beams and I decided to do away with the original ceiling. And these are the original beams that were hidden, I think, on the day of construction till 2018. So this is the living room.
balcony original as well?
The balcony is original. There are no additions or extensions.
Okay.
The only major structural changes here were the removal of the false ceiling, and there was a single large restroom servicing 2 rooms, which I made into 2 restrooms servicing both rooms. So this is the living room.
It's incredibly airy and light. And do you open it up to ventilate? Because I know natural ventilation is something she had thought about.
Absolutely, I do that frequently. You see that there's ventilation there, and there's a door at the rear as well. It's making quite a cross breeze.
No.
And these are little things that are gathered over the years that I think would complement this living space.
Could you give us a tour of the
Sure.
other rooms?
Follow me. There have been some changes here. Originally there was pantries and staff quarters, so what I did was I broke a few walls and created a bigger space.
Am I right in guessing that under these wings there are walls?
And there was a wall there which basically closed off the staff quarters to the rest of the apartment. And I incorporated the staff quarters into the apartment, and I've done the same with the master bedroom.
So this is the second bedroom?
This is the second bedroom, that is all little balcony as well.
Oh, that is delicious.
It overlooks this
It's
grand
so
old house of
green.
bungalow. It's very, very green indeed. And you have the same, I hate to say it, but we have great views for the bathrooms as well.
Very important.
There's still some work going on in here. It's a never-ending project. So I would say that this is almost complete, but not quite.
I think it's very nice to see how these buildings kind of change over time.
Evolve over time, absolutely.
Opening up is absolutely a contemporary way of living.
This is the master bedroom. It's actually about double its original size. I was mentioning the staff quarters earlier, and the original extension of the staff quarters has now been incorporated into this bedroom, giving it a much larger look than a traditional flat. One of the incredible things about Minnette, I think, is how much you can do with relatively little square footage. It's a fairly modestly sized apartment. It's certainly not large by any standards. It's under 2,000 square feet, but it feels much larger. It feels very expansive.
So maybe as we look at some of the spaces, could you describe a little bit more about how you like living here? I know that there's also these very carefully positioned carports in furniture apartments.
That's right, correct.
Maybe even just what that ritual of kind of getting into the space, and then there's lovely light wells. What is it like with the tenant?
It was absolutely fabulous. In fact, when I first rented, the owner told me that he would sell me this apartment only over his dead body. He's not dead, and I am an owner. I think he had a change of heart, and he felt that I'd done the apartment some justice, and that he felt it belonged to me. And I'm happy to say that it's actually like a dream come true for me. And I've been very, very careful to try and keep to Minnette's ethos and the whole look and feel. What can I say? Living in an old building is never the same as living in a new building. It has a charm all of its own. We don't have a generator. We don't have a gym. But what we have is real patina and a real connection with something that's architecturally significant. It's absolutely fabulous. The high ceilings really cap it all off for me. I'm lucky that I'm on the top floor, because the other apartments don't have that benefit.
Do you think, also as we see Colombo increasingly getting apartments and just multi-unit housing, do you think that this kind of offers
Absolutely. This is really not only a residential oasis just look out the window, but it's also an architectural oasis. To own or to live in or reside in just one of 10 units from an architect long gone. And I don't think she designed many apartment buildings. Most of them were actually commercial or private residences. So I would venture to guess that this might be one, if not one of two, that she's ever done. So thank you for this opportunity to allow me to show you around.
Thank you.
Yes, it's a work in progress, as you can see, so excuse the mess. If you want some other tidbits, this is from the base motor of a bus, the CTB bus, bought in a junkyard. And I thought, you know, the high-tech refrigeration contrasted with very, very old locomotion would be very cool. And behind you are panels from an old train, which I've used to embellish the wall. What things I've picked up over the years. I'm happy to say that there's not a piece of furniture here that's been bought brand new, accumulated through friends, junkyard sales, auctions, whatever. For example, over here we have something on the street. It was under a tree on Regulus Road, and this must be weighing a good 50 kilos. It says gas on it, and this is an original valve marker for the gas lines that ran down Regulus Road in the late 19th and early 20th century. It takes 3 people to move it. It did take 3 people to move it. And here it is. Luxury, I think, is what's rare, requires effort, has meaning. So anyone can own a Rolex, but there's only one of these. And I put it to that that's a great luxury.
I think Minnette would be, looking at things from different periods of time is so important.
Yes.
I think she would really love what you've done with the face.
Thank you
Not
very
that I
much.
would love it, but I guess.
Thank you very much for allowing me to show you home. But we're not done yet. Where I spend most of my time is in a room. That's right here. And without realizing it, this little counter over here where I'm standing looks very much like a picture from one of Minnette's old archives. And I realized that many years after I actually installed this piece, her one looks far better, of course. Yeah, it was kind of an unconscious or subconscious tip of the hat. There's a picture of her lounging on a beautiful carpet. So quite by chance, this is where I spend most of my time.
And this would have been a bedroom?
This was a bedroom, indeed. Indeed it was.
Do you know if all the units are 3-bedroom? Are they all?
There are 5 3-bedroom units and 5 2-bedroom units.
Okay.
But I understand that some of the tenants have modified them. So 2 bedrooms have become 3 small bedrooms and so on and so forth. So in my case, I went down from 3 bedrooms to 2.
But I think that is one of the really nice things about this set of units, how each one has been sort of made their own, which is not a freedom you always get.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we don't really have the condominium management police coming and checking on us. Managing this building obviously is a challenge because it's old. So there are infrastructure challenges. Who paints what? Who does what? So, it's just like living with the neighbors.
Yeah.
Whether you had a house or an apartment. So I think Minnette also had wanted to build bungalows in the sky. I read that somewhere.
Yes.
And I'd like to think that as the years have gone by, this apartment or the conservation of it has shown how space can be regenerated. So it was originally a space that looked a lot smaller, but not by chance, we were able to make it look a lot bigger, unlike how it is today.
I think so. Maybe we could just take a look at the book, which features
Yes,
her book, her archives really, which feature.
I mean, just there's so much has changed here. These open carports no longer exist. These are walled garages with gates in front. I mean, I've never seen this feature before until I looked at this page just now. And I was thinking, before we started this, I had a quick glance at this and I couldn't figure for the life of me. And I was going to ask you, what building is this? But this is very much this space here. And these carports, I'm presuming, would have opened up into the center atrium,
Directly
which is now
into
closed off. So this is absolutely stunning.
Absolutely, and she also talks about, she has in the book
the various iterations that she presented to the clients. And I think she talks about the changing of the roof, because she wanted a slab roof.
Right.
But I think due to finances, it became a beam and slab roof.
Right.
And I know we're going to be able to pop up to the roof in a
Yeah.
second. But I did want to show this photograph, which shows Minnette in the space, which is one of the things she often does. She really situates herself in
Like
these
a
buildings.
like a 1950s selfie.
Yeah, I guess so. It's also, I guess, a claim that, you know, this is... should we go to the roof?
Yeah, sure. To the left. That's a great view from here.
Do you use the space? Do you
We
know
do
the
indeed.
residents?
What's interesting is that I noticed in your other pictures that the vegetation had not grown. So
Yeah.
that tree is in the picture is now absolutely enormous. So the building, I think we've had a fresh influx of new owners and tenants who seem to appreciate architecture and have, with their own resources, actually started, mini restoration in the general vicinity and the general public areas. You notice that it's freshly painted. The boundary wall, which was quite in disrepair, has been completely restored to its original form. So change is happening slowly. It only takes one person to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And I think that whole project has now taken a life of its own. People are taking an interest in, keeping the legacy alive. But I wouldn't think of it anywhere else. So it's fantastic. I'm very happy.
Thank you. Thank you for the tour and for
You're
sharing your home with us. It's really, really amazing to see it.
You're most welcome.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Shayari, and welcome everyone back for a little Q&A. We're really pleased to have Shayari de Silva here with us and Ondřejem Tučkem, who we met before, who is now safe in the warm, in a very nice looking cafe. How are we all doing? Thanks so much for those videos, guys. I wanted to begin by asking about the ideas and the influence of these projects. So they both proposed something quite interesting for the future of their cities when they were built. Both of them were kind of an argument for density, for modernity, for quality housing. Did these ideas catch on? Did they influence other buildings and developments in Colombo and in Prague, or are they kind of one-offs that are kind of resigned to history? Maybe, Shayari, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, George, for having me. It was really great to be able to show these flats, because they are, as you say, quite visionary, and they, I think, definitely respond to a moment where Colombo is getting from being it's still a quite small city, but it goes from this moment of being to being more dense and just also people questioning new ways of living. And I think Minnette was really able to respond to that. She did about 2 other similar scaled projects and then a housing project. But I think what's really interesting about this particular set of flats is the way she's suggesting it's almost a transition in a kind of living as opposed to this complete rupture. So she describes them as having verandas, and she uses some of these elements that I think would be familiar to people in houses here. But then she also completely reconceptualizes it. It's, you know, there's this the whole flats, they sit on these 10 carports. So she's also thinking very much about, you know, how you would access or how you would navigate the city also. Unfortunately, they don't become as, they don't really become a kind of model, I think, in terms of housing in Colombo. But I think that has a lot to do with how housing develops and how the city develops. So there is, one of the things you see architecturally in Colombo is that there is an increasing kind of rupture between buildings of the city and then the public and the architectural fields. They don't develop sort of hand in hand necessarily. So she does do, for example, a housing project in Kandy for the state, but I think that doesn't become the norm for architecture in general. And I think perhaps also we don't talk, and they're not very well known flats even in Colombo, which is kind of interesting. But I think as we're seeing some of the changes happening, maybe they will be looked at, because they're, in terms of scale, a quite interesting mix between the single family house, which is still very prevalent, and then these like mega blocks, which are also increasingly, you know, coming out, sort of mushrooming all over the city.
I see. And Ondřej, how about in the case of Diablice, is that a kind of one-off mega development, one of its kind, or are there other similar developments of that scale on the edges of Prague?
Yeah, Diablice is the part of the belt of the new housing estate complexes. They were on the northern part. There were 4 of them. Diablice with the Bohnice and Prosek and Kobylisy, and each of them has its own unique urban structure, and they are different. They differ one from each other, and we can say that maybe from the beginning, the first housing estates were maybe more complex and more author work than the later ones, and the last one, the Bohnice housing estate from the early 80s, maybe was a little bit changed during the realization, and the initial idea was not very fulfilled. So the result is not very or isn't so good as it is in Diablice. And then we have another housing estates in the other parts of the town. In the southern part, we have the South City, which is 100,000 people. It was based on the competition ideas in the beginning, but during the planning period and the realization, it was very the result is very different from the beginning, from the initial design and ideas, and the result isn't so fine than it is in Diablice. And then on the end of the 80s, this era of big housing prefabricated developments ends, and afterwards we don't have any such huge housing estates in Prague or in Czech Republic at all. So it is very connected with the political system, with the social era here in Czech Republic, and now we don't continue with these huge systems of housing.
Yeah. Actually kind of leads me quite nicely onto my next question, which I think you both started to touch on, is how are these projects seen now? Are they seen, you know, do we see them as exemplary? as examples of how we'd like to build. So, for example, you know, those communal facilities in Diablice seem fantastic to me, and the quality of the homes in the Syna flats are fantastic. Are they seen in that way? What's the reputation of these projects in their context? Ondřej, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that people know. Are informed, or the architects and urban planners, they know Diablice very well. It is published very frequently in the press or in the books, and it is mentioned in some exhibitions and so on. So I think that the people now, after a couple of years, they return to this era and think about how can this be possible, or what is the quality of these parts of town. And I think that it's very popular in public as well, and people like to live here, and the flats here are quite expensive. So I think that that the quality is very well known.
And Shayari, yeah, same question for you. I mean, Minnette de Silva, I feel like, is having a bit of a moment of reappraisal, or you know, like a lot of women architects of the last 150, 200 years, her work has perhaps not been as recognized as some of her collaborators. For example, she worked with Le Corbusier, who's one of the most famous figures in architecture, but she had her own voice, her own style, which is starting to be reconsidered. How is she understood in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, alongside the apartments that you showed us?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. I mean, I think that her work is getting reconsidered also at a time where I think maybe there's just a slight resurgence in generally thinking about and talking about architecture and architecture of the last 100 years, which hasn't really been particularly a focus, I think. These flats, because they're just 10 units and there's no really sort of public space within the site itself, I think have not been so well known. But the resident we met, for example, mentioned that there has been, in the last few years, new younger residents who are very, very proud of living in this building. I think also Colombo, we are joining you from the middle of a major economic crisis, and I think what will happen with that is that building is really, and we've had a massive building boom in the last few years, and lots of really enormous projects of gigantic budgets and sort of many high-end apartments. I think that now, as that those kinds of projects come into crisis, there will be a lot of reconsideration of these sort of medium scale, smaller scale, multi-story responses to urban density. So I think I feel very hopeful about how her work might be considered now.
Yeah. And now to turn slightly to the future of the project, Ondřej, you spoke about the kind of ongoing discussion about the Diablice estate. You're in one of these communal facilities now, which is maybe being reconsidered. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the type of development you might see taking place on the estate in the next couple of years. Like, what kind of changes are being proposed?
Yes. A couple of years ago, here came a big developer which intended to destroy smaller shopping centers and build tall towers for new residents, 15 stories high. There were 3 or 4 of them, and it caused quite strong resistance of inhabitants, of people here, and it creates some protests, and now it is stopped, and the plans are freezed for a moment, and on the city level there is a new urban master plan prepared, which should create new boundaries and new limits for new or reconstructed buildings here. And now it seems that some of new refreshment will be possible, but not in this volume that was intended before. So these smaller buildings could be raised up to 2 or 3 floors high, but not more, and should play the public role. So be intended to be used as public buildings, not the residential. But the process is not finished yet, and the plans are not clear for the moment. But there are some empty places as well, some areas that was not built up, but they were intended to be. So some areas of planned school with artistic school which was not realized, and some smaller lots that can be maybe used. And I think that the discussion and the future is open. So we will be maybe surprised what will happen.
Yeah, and as a resident and a relative of one of the architects of the estate, what do you think of these plans? Do you think it should be left as it is, or do you welcome these new proposals?
Yes, there is a one point of view which is heritage or protection point of view, that people, some of them say that this housing estate should be preserved or protected and stay as it is. I think it's not the right way. And I'm sure that one of the problems of this housing estate is that we don't have any job options here. All people have to travel for their work, for their jobs somewhere else in the city center. So they only sleep here, and children attend to schools, but adults have to move away for the work. So I think that some kind of job offers should be additional quality for people here. So maybe some administration or other kind of services is missing here. So it would be fine to build some here. And as well, these secondary schools are missing here. We have only the primary schools, but not the secondary teaching level. So I think that this kind of service is missing.
Okay.
So,
and Shayari, same question for the Senayaka flats. I mean, what does the future hold for those? Obviously, with residents like Surain, they're in safe hands. He's obviously taken a lot of care for his home, but is the building itself safe from, say, demolition or other renovations which might ruin some of that character?
Legally, it is not, because in fact, Sri Lanka's laws around sort of heritage buildings are really outdated. A building has to be built before 1815. Basically, the law has not been updated since British colonial times for it to be, legally required. And then between 1815 and 1915, if it's had a significant history, it could be considered of archaeological value. But just the very fact that it's archaeological value and not architectural value is quite telling. And this is actually why I think so many of Minnette's buildings, and so many of even that period, where there were many amazing architects, I think a lot of that work has been lost or significantly altered, because there's no, and to be honest, it doesn't really look like that's likely to even come in from a sort of state perspective. But I think that's where a lot of these projects of, talking about them and sharing their importance and the kind of ideas that they hold becomes really quite important, I think. And in that particular, because there's 10 units, and I think it's a very high-end building. I mean, it's in a very expensive neighborhood. I think that it is being looked after by virtue of the residents just loving the building. But I know there are many single-family homes of hers that are even now being demolished, as we speak, because there isn't that facility to look after them. So I think
I can't really speak to a certain future, but I think with the Cyrenaica flats, there is hope.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, perhaps Housing in the People Open House Worldwide Festival will be the beginning of a campaign to protect the Cyrenaica flats. You heard it here first. We have time for just one more question. I wanted to ask you both, what do you think are the key lessons that architects and commissioners of housing can learn from these projects? What are the things that we should be taking forward from these visions, these modern marvels into the future of housing? Ondřej, I'll begin with you.
Thanks. I think that the residential role of this complex is very important, and I think the quality of the flats here is outstanding. If I compare it with the contemporary development projects which are building now, I think that they don't very often get to this level of how the flats are designed and equipped. So this is the lesson from for me, how important it is to take care of the dispositions of the plans of the flats and also of the common spaces. But I know that this scale, this huge amount of these big buildings will never happen again. But the quality can be repeated, I think.
And finally, Shayari, same question to you. What can we learn from the Cyrenaica flats?
I think what struck me in thinking about them in terms of Minnette's own sort of visionary abilities was just how she, while it is a really radical sort of change to how people were living at the time in Colombo, I think she's quite careful to consider that. So the way she thinks about this, you really feel like you're in the trees when you're in those flats, which is quite amazing. And you know, she talks about opening it up to have verandas and really thinking about the public spaces. So I think she was quite conscious of what would make them appealing to this climate, in this culture. And I think that's something we have lost quite a bit in newer housing projects. So I think there's a lot to look at, and you know, they could be totally naturally ventilated, those apartments, just the way they've been made.
Super, a lot to learn from both. Unfortunately, I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. So thank you, Shayari, and your collaborators in Colombo. Thank you, Ondřej, and all of the Open House Prague team. We're going to head to a break now before we hear from Vienna and London. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you soon.
Thank you very much.